Thank you, everyone. Hello. My name is Aziz Abu Sara, and I'm here to talk to Mr. Alban, and then later the three other panelists here will join us. So for the first 20, 25 minutes, the two of us will hold a conversation, and then you guys gonna join us and comment about probably our conversation or whatever you'd like to talk about. And this is exciting for me because last year, if you were following the news in Jerusalem, I decided to do something a little weird, which as a Palestinian in the city, decided to run for mayor of Jerusalem. The problem with that is I legally couldn't because you have to be a citizen to run for mayor of Jerusalem, and I'm not a citizen. So that was the first challenge. What I didn't know, there'll be many other challenges, from legal challenges in Israel in the sense of my residency, being not a citizen, you easily could be bullied. And then from the Palestinian community as well, which has for a long time boycotted the elections in Jerusalem for claims that it would legitimize the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem, to eventually violence, calls for violence, threats. I got egged, although none of the eggs hit me, so I couldn't even send the guys who can aim well. But it was an important, I think, a step to think differently about Jerusalem, and for the Palestinian community, which we are almost 40% of the city's population, to start to think outside the box and say, in the last 50 years, we haven't really got much going on for us. Rights-wise in Jerusalem, we have so many challenges, so many problems, starting from education, going into house building, permits. You can go on and on and on. Even simple stuff like policing and so on, and the relationships between even East and West Jerusalem, how you deal with all of that. We haven't really gotten much in the last 50 years by boycotting the elections. And so what I wanted to do is to challenge that status quo and say, let's try to do something different. I'm not saying it would 100% solve everything. I'm saying let's at least do something different and hope for different results, try to move things, change the status quo. Now, why that's relevant to this conversation is because you kind of, Mr. Alban here, did pretty much the same thing in Belfast, just a lot more successful than me, because he actually was able to win and become the first Catholic mayor of Belfast. And I wanted to ask you, maybe in the beginning, to tell us how you came to that decision to want to run to be the first Catholic mayor. What were the challenges for you doing that?
Well, first of all, could I say I'm very, very happy to be here, and this has been a wonderful conference, and I want to congratulate everybody who has been involved in organising it, because it's very, very, very fruitful. I was involved in politics since 1985 as a public representative, as a councillor at Belfast City Council. And in 1997, we had an election in which the balance of power in the council became fairly even between unionists and nationalists. And I belonged to the SDLP, which was a nationalist party which drew its support very largely from the nationalist and Catholic community. And we knew that we had an opportunity to win the mayorship in Belfast. And it was an exciting moment because the unionist hegemony had dominated Belfast politics for the past 100 years. And no Catholic, no nationalist had ever an opportunity to attain a senior position in the council, including that position of mayor. And so whenever this situation arose, I was lucky enough to be nominated as the candidate, and we won. And it was a remarkable victory, because we had support from our own party, from Sinn Féin, from the Alliance Party, which is a centrist party in Belfast, and also from some unionists as well, one or two unionists, and some unionists that, in fact, stayed away from the vote to allow me, as an SDLP person, to win that election. So it was a very exciting moment, and it actually broke the mold of city politics in Belfast. And we were pleased to be in that situation where we could break that mold.
But if you've run a few years earlier, there were a few years before calls for boycotting being part of the system, very similar actually to the Palestinian calls that would say, well, if you run part of the British system, you are accepting their dominance in Northern Ireland, and therefore you shouldn't. What do you think made the shift with people that made them able to go and vote and eventually get you there?
Nationalist politics in Northern Ireland from the 1920s was dominated by a people that felt abandoned, a people that felt very oppressed, and a people that felt there was no real hope. And so people really effectively opted out of politics, and the institutions that were there were institutions that people didn't really recognize. If the opportunity came along, elections, if people were elected to the regional assembly, the parliament, they boycotted it on the nationalist side, or if they did enter it, it was a very, very half-hearted thing. So there was this culture of denying the existence, really, of the political reality of the state and really not participating fully in that. That sort of ended around about the mid to late 60s. And then politics started to develop further, and people became more interested in participating in politics at a local government level and also at a regional level. But there was always people saying, you're wasting your time, you shouldn't be going there, you shouldn't recognize this state because this state is illegitimate, and therefore you shouldn't really participate. And if you do participate, just participate to destroy the whole thing. So those were the attitudes there. But now, in 1997, we had the opportunity. And, you know, nationalist representation, SDLP, Sinn Féin had built up over that period of time, and were becoming a significant voice within the city council itself. And so that was the time, that was the opportunity that we had to take the mayorship. And it was very important because it had a symbolic significance right across Northern Ireland. It wasn't just Belfast. And that was the importance of it. And it ended really the unionist hegemony in Belfast, and it cracked the hegemony throughout Northern Ireland.
So as I'm listening to you, I was thinking, if I would have been lucky enough to win, next time, I'll be then the old candidate, not anymore the young and new. No, but if I did, one of the things that people brought up when we were going through this, and we started a list, and it was all young people. I think I was probably the oldest person in the group. But one of the things I would say, how can a Palestinian be the mayor for West Jerusalem? Are you going to be able to deal with West Jerusalem? You are a Palestinian. And which was kind of funny because I was the only person running who spoke both languages, Arabic and Hebrew, equally fluently. And I hire Israelis working in my company. Tons of Israelis do. And I work with Israelis on a daily basis. I was like, this is kind of a weird question. But there was so much fear on the Israeli side. And the Palestinian side, they were saying, yeah, even if you win, you will not really be able to make any change.
Yeah.
So when you won and you became the mayor, how did that affect both the Catholic community and the Protestant communities there? Did they see you as the outsider? Did it really change their lives?
I think the first thing that happened really was that in the Catholic nationalist community, people were very happy that for once the unionist domination of the City Hall was finished, and that they saw that the mold had been broken in terms of politics within Belfast. And they saw that as a joyful event, something to be very happy about. My own father said he had never been in the City Hall in his life, except he said, I went to the City Hall once to pay a gas bill. But he was in the City Hall, and of course he thought it was a wonderful event, so forth. He was very proud and that sort of thing. But many other people felt a sort of liberation that you could progress in politics, you could make a difference, and that there was a new era opening up, and so it was. But on the unionist side, and the Protestant side, people were fearful that this would mean something quite oppressive as far as they were concerned. And of course they were wrong, because our plan as a political party was to establish a partnership between Catholic and Protestant, between nationalist and unionist, to invite everybody into the City Hall, for the Lord Mayor to go around the whole city, to all sections of the city, to involve all sorts of organisations, to involve unionists, to involve nationalists, to involve SDLP, Sinn Féin, Alliance, to involve everybody in the city. And that's what we did. And but it was difficult for unionists, and I understand that. Change is difficult, particularly if you're in the driving seat. Change is very, very difficult indeed. It's hard to take it. It's hard to take. You feel a bit humiliated. You feel that you're under threat. One of the things that changed people's minds in relation to my own position as mayor was in August. I was elected in June. In August, the Princess of Wales, Lady Diana, died in a car accident in Paris. And I had to lead the city's tribute in terms of condolences to her and her death. And in fact, the night after, I had organised, as soon as I heard about it, I organised a book of condolence to be opened in the City Hall. People could sign it. And I was prepared to be the first to sign it. And the night, that night, just before I opened the book, one of the leaders of the unionist parties, Dr. Ian Paisley, leader of Sammy's party there, phoned me up and said to me, he said, Alban, will you open a book of condolence for the Princess of Wales? And I said, Dr. Paisley, it already has been opened. So in a way, he was testing me, but I had preempted the test. And the important thing is to bring people together, because by bringing people together in partnership, they work together. When they work together, you establish trust. And when you establish trust, you then establish the basis in which you can bring about reconciliation in politics. And that's the key to it. And there were other things that we did for example, the armistice, or not the armistice, the Remembrance Day on the 11th of November, a big day in the unionist tradition. I laid a wreath, I wore a poppy and so forth. And that was unthinkable for a nationalist politician to do. But I was determined to do that to reassure unionists that I respected their tradition, but I expected them to respect my tradition as well. And I went throughout the country. I went to Dublin. I went to other parts of the south. I went to all sorts of engagements in order to bring Belfast to the rest of Ireland. And that was very important, because unionists wouldn't do that. And I met with the Irish Taoiseach in the Belfast City Hall, in fact. I met also with the President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, and the subsequent President, Mary McAleese. And all those things were unthinkable for a Lord Mayor, because the Lord Mayor had always been unionist. And then nationalist people, both Republican and nationalists and Catholics, began to see that there was sense in all this and that you could make progress through a new political forum. And then we continued on to do that to build trust.
So I've told you a little bit about the challenges we were facing as
Yes.
Palestinians, I think as even the Israelis here in the city. And in many ways, some of them are similar to what you faced in how the city is run by one group, not the other, the challenges that mean, what that means, the services and how that means to one side. So if you were advising us, if you were my advisor in the campaign, what would you have advised me to do? How would you think the message maybe to the Palestinians and Israelis could have been different? And assuming, or wherever we are now, if you were even advising the current mayor of Jerusalem, what can the city today do to make a difference and maybe push toward that direction, even without having Palestinians on the city council?
Well, I would say to the present mayor, don't be exclusive. Don't rely simply on your own people advising you. Bring people from outside in to advise you. Bring Palestinians in to advise you if they will advise you. Bring other people from outside, because you have got to broaden the base of the mayor's office. You cannot just rely simply on your own people and your own support, because that will be successful in the short term, but I guarantee you it will not be successful in the long term. Because if you alienate people, and I think that people are alienated here, if you alienate people, as indeed the way Catholics were alienated in Belfast up until that point, but if you alienate people, then people become dispirited, they become discontented, and they become simply a problem, a greater problem for you to resolve. And the only way forward in a divided society is partnership, by bringing people together and working together. That's the only way you can do it. Somebody said about a divided society. In a divided society, a majority does not mean a majority cannot bring about a solution. It can only affirm discontent and division. And that is very important to remember, that you have to build a partnership. Very difficult to build partnership, and it's very imperfect. It doesn't work well, and there are lots of rows, lots of arguments and so forth. But once you're committed to partnership, then you can do an awful lot, and you can open up an awful lot. And that partnership will develop trust. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I would say to the mayor, I would say to the councillors, I would say you've got to look at the overall allocation of resources in a city of this size, of almost 1 million people. Are those resources being fairly distributed right across the city? Is everybody getting a fair crack of the whip in terms of the services that anybody is entitled to being a citizen here? And that, if there is a disparity, and I think there may well be, then it is up to the council and up to the mayor to remedy that. If of course there's no Palestinians on the council, it is very difficult for the mayor, even if he was willing to do so, to involve Palestinians in his cabinet in the city council, and I think he does have a cabinet of 8 people or thereabouts. Very difficult to do that. There needs to be participation.
So what do you think we could have done differently, the Palestinian community here, in engaging, changing the status quo? Or our campaign, what could we have done differently?
Well, I think that, I think first of all, it would be wrong for me to say, to come along and be prescriptive as to what Palestinian people would do, because it's up to Palestinians themselves to reach a consensus in relation to the political way forward. I can only point to the way in which Catholics, nationalists, and Republicans participated in the City Council in Belfast. And by participating in the City Council in Belfast, and indeed in other councils as well, they moved things forward, both politically and economically, created a better city, a city that was not entirely at peace with itself, but much more peaceful, because people could look at the City Council and say, well, actually, the City Council is doing quite well. The City Council is actually working well. And indeed today, despite the fact we have no regional assembly and government in full operation, we have, we have a City Council in Belfast that works today very well on a power sharing, on a partnership basis. And that is very, very successful, bringing about development within the city in terms of infrastructure and attracting investment into the city. Because you need investment in the city. It's a very competitive world out there. And if you get a reputation as being a bad place to invest in, or a dangerous place to invest in, or such a divisive city that it's not worth the while, these people are just fighting with one another, then you will not get that investment. And it is very important in this modern world to attract investment from outside your city.
I'll take your advice for sure. As the Palestinian on the stage here.
But could I say that, you know, some people have talked about there being, you know, that there's a degree of hopelessness out there, you know? Mm-hmm. And I hear that and I understand that, and politics is very, very difficult in a divided society. And you have to keep working at it all the time. I think that you have to be pragmatic. I think it is, there was a writer, in fact, Sammy Douglas is very fond of this writer, C.S. Lewis. And he said, C.S. Lewis wrote that between no hope and little hope lies an ocean of opportunity. I think it's very important to remember that. You should never, never give up hope, because you can always bridge differences between human beings. It's very difficult to do that, particularly given a history of violence and so forth. But violence, we all know in Northern Ireland that violence didn't work. And you've heard a talk about that today. Violence didn't work. And those that advocate violence sometimes do that for the noblest of reasons. They're very idealistic, that they believe that violence is a shortcut. But in fact, violence is not a shortcut. Violence, in fact, I believe, is a blind alley. And you get stuck in it. And so there's no future in violence, particularly in a divided society such as we had in Northern Ireland. And there is a genuine recognition, and you've heard that today, on all sides, that violence is not the way forward. There are a few lunatics on the political extremes that will advocate violence and will carry out violence, but violence, I can tell you, does nothing to help the situation.
Thank you.